In this video, you're going to learn how to build a React component that follows all of the modern best practices, design patterns, and that uses clean architecture. Now, what's really cool about this is we're actually going to be doing this in the real world. So I essentially have a side project that I'm currently working on, and I have to build a component for it, and I'm going to build it in this video alongside with you. As I'm building it, you're going to see how I think when I structure my components, the design patterns that I use, and this is actually a component that I'm going to use for this specific project, so it's as real as it gets. So get ready, come along the journey with me, and I promise you, you are going to learn a lot in this video. Oh, and by the way, if you want more design patterns in React, I'm actually building out a whole entire course specifically focused on design patterns that I'm going to put on my upcoming platform, Cause & Code. The platform is coming out very soon, and there's a waitlist for it that you can join. It'll be linked in the description down below. I highly recommend it. Now, let's get into the video. Alright, so let's begin. So here I have the project up and running, and this is the file that we're going to be doing our work in. Now, before we start, there's actually two things that I want to mention. The first thing is that for this video, we're only going to be focusing on component and component patterns. This means that we're not going to be looking at hooks and custom hooks and stuff like that, and we're also not going to be looking at any business logic. This is really about building a component that follows all of the design patterns, all of the clean architecture, and also taking things that already exist in the project and putting them together to actually build out this specific feature. And that's actually my second point. The fact that this is a real project, it means that we actually have things already built in the project that we can use. We're going to be using some components, we're going to be using some functions that already exist, and along the way, I'm going to try to explain to you as best as I can what it is that I'm actually trying to achieve here. So bear with me, this video is going to be a little bit more advanced than what I usually do, which I think is good. I think that you're ready for that. And yeah, let's get to it. All right, cool. Now, before we actually start building anything, we of course have to understand what it is that we're actually trying to build. Now, this project over here is a game. It's an RPG. I won't go too much into what it actually is and how it works. I will just only explain what matters. But essentially, you have like a bunch of skills here in this RPG, skills that you can level up. So if you've ever played something like RuneScape, for example, you'll be right familiar here. But essentially, if you haven't, it's okay. Skills are like things like chopping wood, mining ores, right? Fishing, cooking, stuff like that. This one is going to be the smithing screen, which is basically the thing that you take when you mine some ores. You actually want to make them into bars, and then you want to use the hammer on the anvil to actually make it into weapons and armor. So we're going to be building the smithing screen, which has all of the functionality related to that skill. Now, also something that is important for this project is that every single skill here is completely dependent on locations. So here, if I open up data and then I have here location, you're going to see we have a bunch of locations here, and all the things that you do inside of this application are based on locations. This is relevant for us because we're going to have to be using those locations to actually build the component. So as you can see here, we have a couple of locations, right? It's a record with location ID and then location, right? And this is like the city of Camelot. So this has like a King Arthur theme to it. And here we have a bunch of stuff. We have some characters, we have some buildings, and so on. What we're concerned about is these buildings over here. And why are we concerned? Because the smithing can only happen in one of these buildings, actually in a few of these buildings. They can only happen in these two buildings over here, the smithy and then the furnace. The smithy is where you take your bars, right? Your metal bars, iron, copper, whatever, and you make it into actual weapons. The furnace is where you melt the ore and you make it into bars. So there's two subsections of the smithing skill that we'll have to implement. Now, importantly, if you look here at the rest of the locations, not all locations have buildings. This is currently the way that the project is. Maybe in the future I will change this, but for now, not all locations have a building, so we need to handle that inside of our code. Like see here, this forest doesn't have buildings. These darkling woods here, another forest doesn't have buildings. A mountain as well doesn't have buildings. So we actually have to get only the locations that have a specific building that is compatible with the smithing skill and then display those. And so with that, we at least have enough to start building something, and everything will become clear as we actually start writing and implementing some code. So let's begin. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to build the functionality for a user to select a location. So there's going to be some sort of a menu, right? They can select a location, and they should only be shown the locations that are valid for a smithing location. So only the locations which have buildings that are either smithy or a furnace. Now, to do that, the first thing that I want to do is I want to create a state variable for the selected location ID. So which location have we currently selected, and also the selected building, because again, we're going to be able to select the building within a location. We'll need those because we'll need to pass those to other components so that we can actually render the content of a specific location based on what is actually selected. So I'm going to come here and do const I'm going to create here a state variable. This is going to be selected location ID. I'm going to import useState over here from React. I'm also going to import this location ID, which I handy have. And here, this is going to get an initial value of null because this can be nullable. Initially, this will be set to null. Then I'm going to do the same thing, but this time for the selected building ID. And there we go. I'm going to import the building type over here, and then I'm going to save. And now we have two state variables here that we can actually use and pass to components, and then actually select the specific location in the building. Now, to actually build out our selector component, what we're going to do is we're going to come here and we're going to create another component. And this is one of the design patterns that you want to use. Always break things apart into small components. Always have your components follow the single responsibility principle, which essentially means that your components only have one reason to change. They're small, they're composable, they're reusable, and then you build out the entire application, in this case, our entire screen, made up of multiple small components. That way, everything is easy to manage, it's easy to understand, it's easy to add features upon, and you can onboard as many developers as you want, and they'll have an easy time working with your code base. So here I'm going to define some types for a new component. That's going to be the smithing location selector props. This is going to be our component that is going to essentially allow us to select a location. And here, Cursor knows exactly what I want to do. We're going to have this component take in a selected location ID. So that's going to come directly from our state variable over here. And then two functions, one to actually set the selected location ID, and also one to set the selected building ID. The reason why we want to provide both functions here is because when we're sending a new location, we actually want to clear the building if there was a building selected, because not all buildings will always be on multiple locations. Maybe one location doesn't have a smithy, and so if we select a location that doesn't have a smithy, we should clear the building ID to not show something that is not currently valid in that specific location. And then we're going to come here and we're going to start creating our component here. So that's going to be the smithing location selector component. It takes in these props, and for now, we're just going to have it return nothing. We'll leave it empty for now because we want to code our actual logic. Then what we want to do is we want to come here and replace the content here with our smithing location selector and then pass our required props to it. I'm getting an error here because our component is clearly not rendering anything. That's fine. We will be fixing that. And so this component here, its only responsibility, right, because we're following, again, the single responsibility principle, is going to be to manage the actual selection of a specific location. And the first thing that we need to do that is to actually get an array of locations that are pertinent for this specific smithing skill. And for that, I actually have a handy function here that I can just use and import. This is the get locations for smithing. I'm going to open it up for you to see what it actually does. This one just basically takes all of the values of the locations, the one that we just saw, the object of all of our locations, and then filters them, checks that the location is a city type, right? Which for now, only city types will have these buildings here, and then checks the actual location.buildings, and then sees if any one of them has smithing or furnace, and if it does, it's going to return to us that location. And this is also, although it's not a component pattern, this is also something that you want to do inside of your applications. You want to extract small utility functions like this and put them all across your project, because you never know when you're going to actually need to redo this. Rather, to reuse this, right? The alternative would be to take this code over here and put it directly inside of this component over here, which would bloat the component. And then if you need to use the same logic somewhere else, well, you have to copy that logic, put it there, and you're less likely to have it in a reusable function. If you already create a reusable function directly, you just have it there, it's ready to go, you can just use it, and it makes building your features much faster. Now, this over here is going to return to us an array of locations. And here we know that all of these locations are guaranteed to actually be locations that are valid for our smithing skill. Now, to actually implement the select function of these locations here, we're actually not going to have that implementation done inside of this component here, because again, that is outside of its responsibility. This component here is actually only a wrapper component that's really only supposed to get the correct locations that we want and then configure the actual select component. The reason for that is because our select component actually already exists and it's reusable, and we can just use that instead of re-implementing the same logic. So I'm going to go here to modal, and then I have here a modal select.native. The reason why it's .native is because this application is going to be for both the web and also for the mobile phones, iOS and Android. And for native, it makes more sense for the user experience to have a modal select, whereas on web, I'm just going to use the normal ShadCN select component, which is good enough. So this one is only going to be used for the web, but I chose to use this one here because it's more interesting, and there's a couple of really cool things here that I want you to get from this video. So I'm not going to go too deep on this component, but I will go over the props and actually how it works, because we'll need to understand these props to actually use it inside of this component over here. So this one takes in some props here. It's a generic type. This is used so that I can actually infer the type of the thing that I'm passing to, because we will need to pass those things to other functions, and it's always good to have the type. This one takes here an array of options. Each option is an object with a label, string, and then value of t. This is also a type generic. Then we have here some placeholder stuff, some title. Then we have onSelect. This is the function that we're going to call whenever we're selecting a specific item. This one gets called with the value of the option, right? So in our case, it's going to be the location ID that we want. And then we have here this render option function, which is important because this one is the render props pattern in React. What this essentially does is it defers the actual rendering of the component that we actually show as an option to the parent that's using this component, which is really cool because now the parent can completely decide how they want to render that component and what behavior they want to have with that component without putting all of that complexity inside of this component here. This component is only responsible for the selecting and the options logic, but the actual rendering of these specific options is actually allowed by the parent to pass whatever they want. And so this render option function here gets called with the option, gets called with the onSelect, which we provide here, and then we'll simply return here a React node, and that's it. And you can see it used here inside of the component. So here we just have a ref for our actual modal. Then all of this is just a simple button, right? Which basically shows the selected option here or the placeholder. And then we're actually not even using the modal logic, not even implementing the modal logic. That's yet again deferred to another component. And now you can start to see the general pattern here, which is to build small components, isolate features that are only relevant to those components, and then delegate everything else to other components, and also custom hooks. Now, the thing that's interesting here is we're mapping over every single option. And then again, as I said, instead of rendering the specific option as JSX here and letting this modal select component here become the owner, become responsible for it, we're just calling the render option function. We pass the option, we pass the onSelect, and that's it. We are good to go. Now, importantly, the reason why we're passing this onSelect here to the actual component, which we're going to use inside of this component here, is because the onSelect has to be called within the modal close with action function. The reason why is the modal has an animation when it opens up and down and closes has an animation. We want to call the onSelect after the animation has finished, and that's the responsibility of the modal here, which is coming from this modal component. And so that's why we're rendering the option with the onSelect, because calling just onSelect here, because look, if we're passing onSelect through props, we can also access it in this component here and just call it directly. But that would bypass the actual modal, and we don't want that for the user experience. We want to get within this modal.close with action, and so we're passing and we're rendering the option with the onSelect. Maybe this is confusing to you. It's fine. It's going to make a lot more sense when we actually now start implementing it in this component. So let's do it. Let's come here. Let's return. I'm going to put modal select. I'm going to import the component here, and then we're going to pass here the title, which is going to be select location. And then we're going to start just implementing some of these props. I want to do it a little bit one by one. So let me just close this over here like this. And let's go one by one because it's going to make it a little bit simpler to do that. Let's come here. Let's start providing some options. So the options are going to be, man, this AI sometimes is annoying when you actually don't want to use it and you want to teach something, but it's still useful in other cases. So it's fine. The options over here, we're going to pass options. That's going to be, if you look at the options here, the options is an array of option. So the array will have a label and then we'll have a string. In our case, the value is going to be the location ID. The label is going to be the location.name, which we have access to because the location has an ID and also has a name property that we can use. So here we're going to do locations. These are only the locations that are specific to smithing.map. We're going to map over each location and we're going to render out exactly that, a label, the location.name, and then the value location.id, just like this component expects. Then we're also going to pass the selected option. That's going to be selected location ID. So you can see here why we had to take this through props, right? We need to pass it to the smaller select so that whenever the select the location ID, it's also going to get represented in the actual modal select component, just like we expect. Then we're going to implement the onSelect, and this one, cursor is not getting it right. We need to do two things here. So we're going to create here this function here. We need to first set the selected location ID to the value. Of course, this one is going to be location ID. So you can see now our type generics coming through here. The type is automatically inferred by what we pass here, right? Because we're passing in here this location.id, it knows that this is a location ID, right? So it knows that the value is also going to be a location ID and we don't need to do anything else. And then what we also want to do is we want to come here and set the selected building ID to null, because we said whenever we change a location ID, we also want to reset the building so that we can select a new building. And finally, we're going to come here and implement our render option function, which I'll just put this here for now, but that's not what we want to do. The render option function, right, receives the option here and then the onSelect function. And now we're going to have to use this and actually render out the specific location as an option, just like we want. Now, for this, what's really cool is we had yet another component that already does this functionality, and we don't need to re-implement it inside of the body of this component. So you can see here, everything is a separate component, everything is getting composed together, and that makes it super simple, super easy to actually build out features and to build out the whole application really. The component is going to be the location select card over here, and this one is specifically to go inside of a location that you can select, right? This one receives here a location, so that's going to be the full location object, which we'll have to get and provide. And then on select, we'll call that function with that specific location. We're free to use this or we're free to not use this. It's completely up to us. The function is anyways going to get called with that specific location. Then the component here, just quickly to go over it, right, gets the character from the Zastan store, gets the completed quest over here from the Zastan store as well. Then we have a function here that checks the requirements. So this is why we need the whole location over here, because each location also has a requirement. So the things that you need to do to access that location, and we're basically checking if this location has the requirements. And then we're rendering out here this location select card content, again, another component. So again, we're breaking it apart once again, following the single responsibility principle. This one takes in a location, again, doesn't actually show the specific content, but instead differs based on the specific location type. So for city, we do this, for forest, we do this. And finally, we get to the actual components that kind of do the rendering. Here, we're going to see that we have some views and text. These are finally the components that actually render something, right? So eventually you do come to something that will render something that will show in the UI, but there's all of this component structure around it, this architecture around it, to actually make that happen in a very smooth and simple way. And so what we want is we want to just directly use this component because it's already configured to show any type of location. Now, the only thing that we need here is we need to provide it this location here, and then the onSelect, we already have it, but the location, we don't have it. So let's do that. So what I'm going to do is we have yet another function that we can use. I'm going to do const location equals get location by ID. I'm going to import this and show this to you. This one simply, again, another utility function. Again, you can see here it's used in 17 places. So that's a really good reason to have this in a utility function because it's used everywhere. This one just looks at the locations, indexes it by ID, throws an error if it's not there, and then just returns the location. Instead of doing this here and then checking for undefined every single time, checking the error every single time, you have it in a function. It's good to go, good to reuse, and then you can just use it super simply anywhere. Now, in this case, I'm actually not concerned with an error here because we know for a fact that every single location here is actually a valid location, right? We control this as the developers. We control the specific locations here. It's not a user that determined thing, so we don't need to check for an error. It just makes our code a little bit simpler because we're guaranteed to have a valid location. And if we don't, we're going to get an error, but that means that we did something wrong. And then we're simply going to return here, and we're going to return the location select card, which we'll need to import over here. And this, we're going to pass it here, the location. We're going to pass it here, the onSelect, and that's it. Now we actually have our component here that is rendering a specific location. Now we also need to pass here a key because this is going to go inside of a list. If I go here to the modal select, you're going to see that we're actually mapping over each individual option here, and we're not manually providing a key. So we'll need to provide our own key just so that React doesn't complain and that React can make all of its optimizations behind the scenes. It needs to have a key. And thankfully we have location.id here that we can just directly use. And with this, we actually built our smithing location selector component, which is really great. I'll show it to you here on the mobile just for a second, just so that you have a visual of what we did. So this is our smithing page here. We have the modal select component. I can press select here, and our city here, city of Camelot, is actually showing up. This is the component that's rendered. I can select it, and you can see we have city of Camelot. Everything works exactly as we expect. And now our selected location ID here actually represents city of Camelot that we can now use and actually show contents inside of our component. Now, the next thing that we need to do is actually show the building selector. Now, again, you have different buildings based on different locations. You need to select a building once you have a location, right? To be able to show the specific content for the smithing skill based on that building. If it's a furnace, you show the ores. If it's a smithy, you show all of the bars and all of the item that the user can do. So let's do that. We'll have to create another component here, the smithing building selector here. That's going to pretty much follow all of these same patterns here, but importantly, it's going to be another component. So let's come here, let's put them all below. And by the way, I'm choosing to do this in the same exact file because these components are only ever going to be used within this file here. If they're not, if they're going to be reused in other files, then I will put them in a separate file, in its own file. But for now, these are just the subcomponents that basically make up the smithing screen. So for me, it's easier to just put them all in the same file instead of having to go and jump over multiple files every single time. You might not like this. You might prefer to have them in a separate file. That's totally fine. I'm fine with that. You can go either way as long as you make them into separate components and don't put everything into one giant, big, messy component. So for this one, I'm going to go a little bit faster because it's basically going to be the same thing that we did here just for the specific building. So I'm going to create here the type for this. This is going to be the smithing building selector props. It's going to take these props, but we're also going to have to take the location ID because we'll need to get the specific buildings for the location to actually show them. So we're going to take the location ID, the selected building ID, and then the set selected buildings ID. Again, this is all going to be coming from the state above. Then inside of our component here, we want to get the actual location. So we'll get the location ID here, and we want to get the location because we'll need the location to get all of its buildings, right? Remember, all of the buildings are on the location here. So we need to get the location to be able to map over all of the buildings that we actually want. So we're going to use the same function that we had. So const location equals get location by ID. So we have this location here. Now all we're going to be doing here, this get location by ID just returns any location. If I hover over the type, it's any location here. Now remember, not all locations have buildings. So we're going to have problems with our types if we try to do location.buildings. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to typecast this as location city because we know that at this point, only a city location was actually selected because these are the locations that we got from this function here. So we're safe to cast this here. We're telling TypeScript, I know this is going to be a location city, so this is fine, trust me, and now we'll be able to use the actual buildings. So for this, we'll need to create two variables. We'll need to create const furnace buildings, exactly like cursor exactly knows what to do. So the furnace buildings are going to be location.buildings. This one is not going to be an optional because we know that this location has buildings because it's typed as location city. And we're going to filter all the buildings that have furnace, and let's remove the empty arrays. And then for the smithy buildings, all the buildings that have a smithy. And now we're going to use these and we're going to pass them to the options of our modal select component. So let's do it. Let's come here. Let's return and then modal select. And we're going to do select. Title is going to be select building. Then we'll need to pass the options here. Let me just close the component as we should so we don't get any errors. Options, we're going to provide both the furnace buildings and the smithy buildings, and we're going to convert them to an option with a label and then a value. So we can come here, we can do ... furnace buildings, and then map over each one of these. And oh my God, cursor, what are you doing? Like, let me do it correctly. And there you go. That seems to have worked. Now we do have an error. The buildings don't actually have a name here. Maybe they should have a name. I'm just realizing this now. But for now, we can just put your furnace, right, to just hard code it for a second. But I think ideally they should have a name. That's something that I haven't yet built in this application because again, all of this is in progress, right? So not everything is done. But again, they will have a name and you would just put the name here directly. Selected option is going to be our selected building ID. And then on select, we're going to set the selected building ID. In this case, we don't need to do anything specific with the actual location because the location is going to stay the same no matter what building we choose. So that's totally fine. We can just now go to this render option function. Now for the render option here, I'm just going to remove what the model put and I'm just going to put the code that I have. This is just some simple JSX markup. I'm going to put here, import this one. We're going to import our card component. These are the Shatsian components that you expect. This touchable opacity here basically makes this pressable. It's like having a button here. That's just what it does. On press, we're going to call on select with the actual option that value. And then I'm just going to render out the actual contents here, just like that directly here. Now here, I chose to just do it directly inside of the render option because this is really simple. I could have, and I should have put this in a separate component. Again, this is not finished. I will probably refactor this later on to do it, to also follow the same patterns here, to just have one component here, like the building select card. That would make a lot of sense. But for now, I don't have it. So we're just going to use this and it's fine. And that's it. Now we have our smithing building selector here. So let's go inside of our main component. Now we're going to come here and we're only going to render this if we have a selected location ID. And then we're going to pass here our select the location ID as the location ID, and everything should work. And by the way, look what happens when you follow clean design patterns, right? Clean architecture in your code. You have a bunch of small components, and your main component that is driving the entire screen is what? Like 20 lines of code? Like this is all the code that it is, and it's super clear what this does. You're like, okay, this is rendering the smithing location selector. What is this? You look at this, oh, we're getting the locations. Okay, very clear. And then we're rendering this modal select component. What is this? Oh, this is clear what it does. Great. We have a button. We have a modal. You look at the modal. What is this? Great. You understand. You can follow the logic super easily, and you can just build and ship features. Cool. Now I'm just going to show you what this looks like very quickly. So here we have the city of Camelot, right? And here we can select now a furnace. So we selected a furnace. This works. We can select the smithy. This works. If I select, it is going to reset, right? It is going to reset. Let's assume this was a different location. It is now going to reset it, and we can just reselect our new building. And now we can just use that to actually display the content in our UI. Now, for the rest of this video, I'm going to go a little bit quicker just because this video, I think, got long enough already, and we kind of understand all the patterns now. So now it's just more of the same thing, really. But what I want to do here is I want to create a new component here. I'm just going to paste it here, the smithing building content. This one receives a building ID as props. So that's going to be the actual content that we're going to show for a specific building. Now that we have selected our buildings, we can use that to actually show the specific content. Here, of course, I have another handy utility function, get building by ID. We can import this, and then we just need to type this just like we typed our location city, because we know that these buildings are only ever going to be buildings or smithy, building smithy or building furnace. And then this component, its only responsibility is going to be based on the building type over here to render out the specific content of that specific building type. So this really just acts as a sort of like triage, right? It basically checks the type and redirects to this or to that based on the type. So that's pretty simple. Let's now implement these components here, which are pure UI components. They have nothing really more to it. So I'm just going to paste the components that I already created. So here we have the smithing building furnace content props over here. This one receives a building. I'm ignoring ESLint over here. I know I say that you should never do this. I'm doing this because I'm not using the building, because I will use it eventually. So maybe I should put like a to-do here, but I know myself, I know I will get to this. This will not be in production. This will get removed. So it's only here for now because we're passing the building. I'm not using the building, and ESLint is complaining. So here for the furnace, right, we're only going to be rendering the specific bars that we actually want to show. So these are bars here. I, of course, have another data object of the bars. These are just the different bars that you can have: bronze bar, iron bar, and so on. And you can use that to actually make, you use ores to actually make these bars, which is cool. We're going to import the view over here from React Native. We're going to import our bar list component, which again is another component. It also has the render props pattern. So it passes here this bar here that we can render. We're going to import our router here so we can actually navigate to that specific bar page. And then we can import our bar cart, and then we can do get bar ID. And there we go. Now we have a component that renders out the actual bars for the furnace to be able to use. Then same exact thing for the smithy, right? This one is actually going to do the smithing items. So the items that you can actually smith right over here, you have for now just plate body bronze, which uses bronze bars, right? It's pretty logical. And then we're doing the same thing, smithing item list, another component, render props pattern, smithing item card over here. And there we go. Now we actually have our item. And I just realized here we're passing the item, the smithing item here, which is correct. But here we're calling this function here, which is incorrect. We have the bar, right? We're getting called with the bar here. We can just use the bar, and that's fine. That's better actually. So there we go. Now we have our components actually created. Now the only thing that we need to do is just render out this smithing building content here inside of our main component. So we'll go up here, we'll come, and then we're going to do this only if we have a selected building ID, and we're going to render out this smithing building content, pass it the building ID, and there you go. Our component is complete. We can just remove this import here because we don't need it. And there we go. Our component is complete and fully functional. And to see what this looks like, so now we have the bars over here. I'm seeing the style is a little bit off. I believe I forgot a class name over here. Yeah, scrollable, and this, yeah, this should be fine. Now things look a little bit better. We have the city of Camelot here. I can select the smithy. I can select the furnace. Our items are shown exactly as we expect. I can press on a bar. Now we're on the bar page over here, which is, again, I haven't shown this, but it exists. And here we can start smelting, right? Just like you would expect. Same thing for the iron bar. You can do that. And then same thing for the smithy. You can come here and you see this one requires bronze bars to actually do. And there you go, our feature is fully complete. And did you see how simple that was? How clean our code looks? Like, how easy is this to understand? Would you feel happy working with this code? I think so, because it's great code, right? I'm very proud of this code. Everything is organized, everything has a place, everything has a specific purpose, everything has only one responsibility, and we're building out the entire feature by composing all of these things together inside of our main screen component over here. And that's really the secret when it comes to components. This is how you want to build your components in your applications. You can imagine that the rest of my application looks exactly like this, right? And if you do that, you have a component for everything. You can use it. You can build features super easily. Just to kind of show you, I was able to build this in like a few days, really. All of these skills here, this wood cutting follows the same patterns, right? This mining stuff, all of this follows the same patterns. And I was able to build this super simply because I'm following all of these good design patterns and I implemented this clean architecture. And now there you go. You know how to do exactly the same. So that's it. That's all that I had for this video. I hope that you've enjoyed this. If you did, make sure to leave it a big thumbs up. You can also click here to subscribe. You can click here to watch a different video of mine. My name has been Darius Kozin. This is Kozin Solutions. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Ciao.